listening to my presentation. So we all know the classic story of Pride and Prejudice. Mr. Darcy and Lizzie Bennet, the misunderstandings and miscommunications, the family drama and the societal expectations. And we've seen it through multiple different lenses. We've seen it in a modern context from a few years ago with a girl in her diary who goes through work conflicts and family drama as well. We've seen it in the context of Bollywood with music and singing and the bits we've seen in class. And we've even seen it with zombies and fighting with swords and bloods and guts and a bit of sexualization. But one point that we haven't seen Pride and Prejudice in is through the eyes and minds of dogs. So I would like to present to you today Paws and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice through the mind, bodies, and thoughts of dogs. Starting off, my setting, I would like to place it in modern day, but make it in both London and the English countryside. London gives us the nice modern kind of fast-paced that would come with a new adaptation of the story, but I wanted to add in the English countryside for scenes that are going to be at the Pemberley residence or at Colin's and Charlotte's home, so that we get a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new, and something, just like in the top picture here, something that kind of reminds us of the old Jane Austen story that we know and love. So we get a little bit of both, but still in the modern day, because there are still homes that look like this in the English countryside. For casting, obviously mine will be a little different than the ones we've seen before, but I'll get more into it as we go along. This is something along the lines of what I would like my Elizabeth Bennet to look like. In this adaptation, she'll be called Ellie, so she's more of like a dog, but the main points that I want to say about Ellie is that she's a mutt. And so we're going to see this battle of social classes come through this adaptation, as here are the purebreds and here are the mutts. And the purebreds look down on the mutts and they don't think that they're as good. And so Ellie, she's very pretty as you can see, but she's not a purebred. And she's probably of the lower class. So that's our protagonist there, Ellie, or Elizabeth Bennet. And I'd like her to be voiced by Carey Mulligan, because I've loved Carey Mulligan's work in the past. I think she's an exceptional British actor. I would want the actors in this one to be English, because I want their accents to, replicate what we've seen in the past, and because it takes place in London and in the English countryside. And Carey Mulligan has had experience in both period pieces and modern dramas and modern movies, so I think her experience will lend itself nicely to my adaptation. The casting for Mr. Darcy, or in this he'll just be known as Darcy, he could look something like this. He's a very purebred, he could be a beagle, he's very proud, but he can be misunderstood. I as well chose Benedict Cumberbatch just because I think he does great work. As well, him and Carey Mulligan both have popular fan bases in both the US and across the pond. So I think that it would attract audiences both here and in England. So, because they both have big fan bases, and I know he's done some voice work and a lot of stage work and film work. So they're both, Benedict and Carey Mulligan are very experienced, and I think they would work very well with my adaptation. And you could have fun with casting certain people, like Mr. Collins, as something silly like a bulldog. My story sketch. I want the story plot to mainly follow Pride and Prejudice because I think it'll add to the humor of it if the dog's drama is just as serious as it was in the book and in film adaptations we've seen in the past, where they actually are considering marriage and their families are embarrassing them. So I want the plot points to follow very closely, but I want their interactions to take place obviously in places where dogs would be. And so maybe the ballroom scenes would be held in a dog park, or there are important conversations that we need to know like what goes on in certain scenes, those would take place while walking in the park with their owners. And one thing that I want to add before we go into my sample scene is the dog, this is going to be solely through the dog's point of view. So the only time we'll ever see the humans is just their feet, or we never see their faces because we want this to be all through the dog's point of view, almost like it's a dog's world and the humans are just kind of living in it, and the owners take this kind of back seat. So now, if I could have my actors come up for my sample scene, we're going to see a bit of what the proposal scene would look like if it were dogs. This is Abby Fox. She will be playing our Ellie, and this is, oh my gosh, you guys know her now, and he'll be playing our Darcy. And I will be reading the kind of stage directions, or so you have it. Pause and Prejudice. Scene opens on Ellie in a simple, comfortable room, sitting in a dog bed at the feet of a woman. The door to the room opens, and we see Darcy in the doorway and the feet of his owner.
Ellie.
Ellie raises her head up off the dog bed where it was resting before.
Why, hello, Darcy.
We see the feet of the owners walk off and leave Ellie and Darcy in the room together.
Forgive me for the intrusion. I came here to question the state of your health.
I'm doing just fine, thank you.
Ellie gets up from her dog bed and makes her way out of the room coldly. Darcy, confused and frazzled, follows her.
Miss Ellie.
The two make their way through what looks to be a kitchen. We see the feet of human bustling about, but never their faces.
If you could please, Miss Ellie, I wish to discuss an important matter with you.
Go ahead.
Ellie trots her way out of a doggy door. Darcy follows. We are now outside in a spacious, grassy countryside. There is a doghouse a short ways away. Ellie makes her way towards the doghouse and then enters.
I suddenly find myself feeling quite ill again. If you wouldn't mind leaving me alone.
Ellie, I love you.
There is a pause. Ellie sticks her head out of the doghouse, cocks her head to the side.
You what?
Despite your unsuitable owners, the inferiority of your ill breeding, and the disapproval of my owners, I love you. I have tried to ignore my feelings, but I cannot. Please do me the honor of accepting my Paul in marriage.
Ellie makes her way out of the doghouse.
I do apologize, Darcy, but I cannot accept.
This is the only answer I am to receive. But why?
Why? You tell me you love me, but insult my family and owners in the process, and you expect me to accept the offer of a dog that has ruined the tail wagging of a most beloved sister.
Darcy hangs his head.
Do you deny it?
I do not.
I knew your character from the moment I heard of your encounters with poor Wickham.
Poor Wickham.
You pee on his lawn and treat him as though has done wrong.
Oh, that would be the side of the story he tells you.
Your pride, arrogance, and treatment of others has made me realize you are the last dog I would ever be prevailed upon to marry.
A pause. We take in the expressions of Ellie and Darcy.
Forgive me, Ellie, for wasting so much of your time.
We see Darcy exit out of the doggy door, back into the house, and shoot back to a frustrated and distressed Ellie as she lies down, placing her nose between her paws. Thank you. Thank you. Now that you've seen a little slice of the scene, I want to get into really why I wanted to do Pride and Prejudice through the eyes of dogs. So, by a show of hands, how many of you here have seen one of these two movies? So, thank you. So you might be thinking, what does this have to do with Pride and Prejudice? But I'm getting there. So, 10 Things I Hate About You and She's the Man are both stories that seem like normal teen dramas, funny comedies that we all had a part of our childhood or teenage years. But one thing that they actually have in common is that they were both telling the stories of Shakespeare through what seems to be a simpler a simpler means of communicating the story. So my adaptation, it hopes to do the same exact thing. I want to reach out to a younger generation and introduce them to the story of Pride and Prejudice at a young age and have them learn to love the story, maybe almost tricking them into loving the story, because these movies, I didn't even understand that I was watching a Shakespeare, or something that was based off of Shakespeare until much later in my life. I just thought that they were funny comedies when I was growing up. But really, 10 Things I Hate About You tells the story of Taming of the Shrew, two sisters that don't get along and have trouble with dating. And then She's the Man tells the story of Twelfth Night, a woman who actually dresses up as a boy to try and prove a point. But I want to reach out to a younger generation and to convince them that maybe this book doesn't have to be just something that they'll hate later on in their English classes. Thank you. Do I have any questions?
That was great.
Ricky?
Okay, so I have two questions actually. One, do you plan on, is your demographic going to be more adolescent per se, or more like younger generation?
Definitely. I even wanted to gear the script towards more adapting it so that a younger audience could understand it, but there'll also be small little jokes and quips that the older adults that
That's
are
what I was
taking
gonna
as
ask you.
kids to see it will understand. Like we can have jokes and references to other adaptations having a soaking wet Darcy like shake himself out, almost like the Colin Firth Darcy that
Right.
exits the water. And so these little jokes that only certain people who have seen other Pride and Prejudice adaptations will understand.
Do you feel like you would almost be in competition with Disney's Lady and the Tramp?
Oh, I definitely did think about that, and that was, to be quite frank, that was part of my inspiration where I drew from. I saw a movie that took dogs of two different classes, and so it was inspired by that, I'm going to be very honest, but I think that it takes on a new kind of spin because it's based off of this literature that we've had for years and years. But people can say, oh, it's like Lady and the Tramp, and I almost think that that'll lend itself to be helpful to my adaptation because kids will be like, well, I understood Lady and the Tramp, it's almost like that. And so they can say like, yes, exactly, and here's the actual book that they can later be introduced to. So I do think that it will be compared to it, but I think that that'll work to our advantage actually.
Would you want this movie to be a little more so a live action?
Yes, I do want the dogs to be like real. Obviously, in the past we've seen, I don't know if you guys have seen this, but they had